If we look at how identity forms at a human level, it's important to be aware that we all start out as infants without language, without the ability to think and discern, and as relative clones, meaning the human identity is replicated by a male and a female, producing a genetic pattern inside a woman, and a clone, a copy of the pattern of the identity is formed, initially a physical copy. 2 arms, 2 legs, a nose, 2 ears, similar skin color. It's a copy. And at birth, the child has tonal awareness and has facial and spatial awareness. And the default for a new human being is that the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that has kept mom and dad alive and has kept the species alive in an ecology in which not everyone is alive, and not all species that once existed still exist, an assumption is made, a program defaults to saying, mom and dad are alive, I am going to take my cue from those that are living. And so when mom gets stressed and upset, it must be a big deal. When mom is happy, it must be good, because mom is alive. And many things are not. And I have no operating system to make any other evaluation. And so in the innocence of childhood, a child absorbs the psychological identity and, in many cases, the physical identity of its cult. The child will eat, by default, what the family is eating and what the family feeds it, whatever that is. The child will learn the language. The child will notice what is and isn't important by the emphasis in the giants around it. Every time sex is mentioned, there are rapid eye movements, there are giggles, there are laughs, there are this. Sex must be a big deal. All the giants seem frightened of it, interested in it, paranoid by it, ignorant about it, lying. Sex is obviously this huge deal. I don't know what it is because I can't think, but I can correlate eye movements and tone, and I can determine that I am in a cult in which sex is a very big deal and is not talked about directly. I don't know why. I just must assume, because my parents are alive, because the other giants are alive, and I don't want to die, I must assume that this somehow helps them stay alive. That's the default mode. And so I learn to be like them. I learn to be indirect when it comes to talking about sex. When someone says, "How are you?" I don't say, "Oh, I feel so great. This is one of the best orgasms I've had in years. It's magnificent. I feel so excited. Who wants to join me in a group hug? Because, this is just amazing. Who wants, anyone interested in how it went and all this? Because this is exciting. But that's not what we do. Why? It's not discussed. Why would you say I'm fine, and then we'd play a game about that for the next 3 days, everyone guessing, when that's so efficient? Why? It's not discussed. So you've got a clone mechanism. Everyone starts out as a clone of the physical body is a clone, but so is the language, so is the diet, generally speaking, so is the emphasis, the hierarchy of values, the paradigms, the meanings. That person is rich, they're dirty. That person is poor, they're dirty. Which cult are you in, right? Well, if you're in the cult that says this person is closer to God because they're wearing gold, or are you in the cult that says this person is closer to God because they're meek and the meek inherit the earth? Or what is it? It's your cult. There's no questions at this stage. So this is how identity forms. Is children are formed at a time when they cannot think and critically evaluate, and they default to cloning their parents. So that's why intergenerational patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being have taken place, are taking place, and will always take place. Now, the question is, well, how did the group get to be like that? Like what happened that made this group like this and this group like that? Why? How did it originally form? Well, in largely unconscious and psychologically illiterate cultures or groups, trauma is the primary kind of center of gravity. Traumatic events. This happened, so we never talk about this. This happened, so we were able to live. You know, we learned science, and so we survived in the Arctic. Science is now the deity, so we're now all scientists, because without science we can't live. We came here, we didn't know what we were doing, half of us died, and then one person figured this out, and so we've been doing it ever since. So trauma can shape identity, and many of our identities, culturally speaking, have a traumatic origin. Or they have a survival origin. We did this by accident, or one of our people did this, and then it got good for everyone else. You know, in Silicon Valley, when people were leaving good-paying jobs in the 80s to start Microsoft or start Apple or start Google, it was not a popular thing. It was frowned upon. You'd ask a teacher, should I go join a startup? Should I volunteer at Google or something? No. Become a banker. Do this. That's the pattern. Now, most people listened to their cult. They didn't do a startup. They didn't do a business. They didn't do what they wanted to do. They didn't do what they're interested in. They didn't start a company. Most followed the pattern. But a few deviants, meaning they deviated from what? The cult. The status quo. They became anomalies. They mutated the pattern. Now, most mutated patterns die out. 95% of all cultures are now dead. They were variations in the possibility field. Most species that have ever existed are now dead. And most times an individual deviates from the dominant network, they wither and die. You'll look at this video. It's a deviation from most of the types of videos that are getting the most views. So statistically speaking, a series of videos about identity talking about this as a mutation, statistically speaking, 95% of the time, no one's ever going to hear about this. No one's ever going to know about it. and it'll die out as a meme. That's the norm. But sometimes, a small minority of the time, the minority, the deviant, gets it right so successfully that after 20 years of complaining about it, not understanding it, and being frightened of it, everyone jumps on board. The Wright brothers were deviants when they tried to create manned flight. Most people thought it wouldn't work. And most of the people who tried to create flying machines died or didn't become famous and didn't become rich and didn't figure it out. But the Wright brothers were one of those deviants, one of those mutations within the cult norms that proved that you could have human flight and that helped create the world we have today, where everyone believes we can fly, and many people have done it. Flown to a whole different country because of deviation from the norm. And now it's cool to become part of a startup. Now you might be frowned upon if all you've done is worked as a banker. You've never started a business. You don't have any passionate hobbies. See, now the norm has flipped. The new hot thing is to go work a 100-hour week volunteering at a startup that might go bust, and then failure is better than being average. That's the new thing, because it worked for Steve Jobs, because it worked for Microsoft, because it worked for Google. And everyone can see that it works. And that's how change happens. So you have traumatic events, you have exceptional success, and you have copying. So the copying cloning process works just biologically. It's built in. And it's based purely on the logic, Mom and Dad, you are clearly alive. Your bodies, after decades, have functioned well enough to produce me. I am here. You must know something. You're the biggest people around. I depend on you, so I'm going to copy everything that you think, everything that you do, everything that you feel, unquestioningly. I'm just going to become a clone of Mom and Dad. Now, this is why it would be incredibly stupid to punish a 5-year-old for copying their parents. If their parents kill people for a living, then 5-year-olds figure that that's the way to do it. Until you have reason and confidence in an alternative mode of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing, you are going to copy your cult. You're going to copy your parents. The parents are going to copy their cult, the norm. And the norm is going to be defined and evaluated over time based on major traumatic events or tremendous motivation for something positive. The success of Silicon Valley is an example of a cultural shift towards innovation, towards creativity, towards thinking big, towards technology, towards coding and computers. Because in a capitalistic framework, the primary measure of where we should be going is what makes the most money. And so when you're within a paradigm, if you're in a warring paradigm, a conquest paradigm, then the shift from horsemanship to cannons to tanks to ballistic missiles will happen naturally. Because if your paradigm is one of war and conquest, then your primary goal is to kill as many people as efficiently as possible that aren't part of your group. And so anyone who invents a better technology and demonstrates it so successfully that everyone is aware of it. That will become the new pivot. In capitalism, where people are measured by their capacity to create, invest, and generate more capital more efficiently and get more money than everyone else, more rapidly, with less risk, with more ease. When that's the measuring stick, and you see 2 guys, 3 guys, 10 guys creating billions of dollars in a very short amount of time they didn't need to build a factory, they didn't need to retrain thousands of workers, then the paradigm that has already decided that those who make the most money are the most important guides for what we copy shifts from banking to startups. So the cult decides the paradigm, in this case capitalism, and then the past provers in the paradigm were bankers, were large multinational corporations with lobbying power. That was what you were supposed to be a part of, and you're supposed to work yourself up that ladder. But now it shifted. Now the majority of young people would say, I'd like to do a startup, I'd like to do this. I don't want to climb the banking corporate ladder for the next 20, 30 years. Banks will probably be obsolete by the time we have blockchain and this and that and the other. I want to be on the cutting edge. Why? Because that cutting edge is making billions of dollars, is making billionaires in a different way, in a cult that still measures people's value based on how much capital they're able to create. And so you have a pivot. So these are the forming forces of our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being.